Elena Volkov grew up in a small village nestled between the mountains of Eastern Europe, where winter lasted 8 months and survival meant learning to hunt before you could write your own name. Her father was a gamekeeper, her mother a nurse at the local clinic. From the age of 6, Elena followed her father into the frozen forests, watching how he tracked deer through fresh snow, how he remained perfectly still for hours, how he squeezed the trigger with a patience that seemed inhuman. The other children in the village played with dolls and toy cars, but Elena preferred the weight of her father's old rifle in her small hands. By 10, she could hit a tin can from 200 meters. By 14, she was bringing home rabbits and pheasants for the family table. Her teachers said she had a gift, though they meant it for her mathematics scores. What they didn't understand was that shooting and mathematics were the same thing in Elena's mind. Angles, wind speed, distance, trajectory. Everything was a calculation. When she turned 18, the military came to her village looking for recruits. Most young people tried to avoid service, finding excuses or fleeing to the cities. Elena walked straight into the recruitment office and signed her name without hesitation. Her mother cried for 3 days. Her father simply nodded and handed her his compass, the same one his father had carried in an older war. Basic training was supposed to break recruits down and rebuild them. For Elena, it felt like coming home. The discipline, the structure, the early mornings in the cold. She excelled at everything except one thing: fitting in. The male recruits treated her like a curiosity at first, then an annoyance. Women weren't supposed to be in combat roles, they muttered. She belonged in communications or medical support. Her drill sergeant, a scarred veteran named Konstantin, saw something different. During a routine marksmanship test, Elena scored perfect marks with every weapon they gave her. Pistol, rifle, machine gun, it didn't matter. While other recruits struggled with the recoil and the noise, Elena's breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, and the targets fell one after another. Konstantin pulled her aside after the test. He asked her a single question. Did she want to be ordinary or extraordinary? Elena didn't need to think about her answer. Within a week, she was transferred to a specialized unit that officially didn't exist on any military roster. They trained in an abandoned factory compound 3 hours from the nearest town. No signs, no flags, no identifications. The selection process for sniper school eliminated 90% of candidates in the first month. The training was designed to find people who could disappear into their environment, who could control their breathing until their chest barely moved, who could wait motionless for days if the mission required it. Most importantly, it looked for people who could take a life from a distance and live with that decision. Elena discovered she was built for this work. While other candidates complained about the cold, the hunger, the endless waiting, she felt a strange peace. In the scope of her rifle, the world became simple again. There was the target and there was the shot. Everything else fell away. Her instructors were impressed but cautious. A weapon was only as reliable as the person holding it, and they had seen promising candidates break under pressure. The final test came on a winter morning when the temperature dropped to -20 degrees. Each candidate was given a single bullet and told to track an instructor through 15 kilometers of forest. They had 8 hours to take the shot. Most candidates never even spotted their target. 3 candidates took shots and missed. Elena waited 6 hours in a snowdrift, barely breathing, until her target stopped to check a map. She fired once. The paint round hit the instructor directly in the chest. When she returned to base, Konstantin was waiting with her graduation certificate and new orders. She was being assigned to an active combat unit on the eastern border, where tensions had been rising for months. At 21 years old, Elena Volkov became one of the youngest snipers in the military. She was also one of only 4 women to ever complete the program. Her new unit greeted her with skepticism that bordered on hostility. These were career soldiers, men who had been fighting for years, who had seen friends die, who trusted their lives to the people beside them. They looked at Elena and saw a girl playing soldier. The unit commander, Major Petrov, made it clear she would need to prove herself in the field. That opportunity came faster than anyone expected. Intelligence reported that enemy forces were moving supplies through a contested valley. A small team would infiltrate, gather reconnaissance, and if possible, disrupt the supply line. Elena was assigned to provide overwatch, which meant she would be positioned separately from the main team, responsible for their safety from a distance. The mission briefing was tense. The valley was known for ambushes. 3 previous patrols had been attacked there in the past 6 weeks. The men in her unit barely acknowledged her presence during the briefing. One sergeant, a bulky man named Dmitri, made a joke about hoping the pretty girl wouldn't get scared and give away their position. The others laughed. Elena said nothing. They moved out before dawn, hiking through rough terrain to reach their positions by sunrise. Elena carried her rifle, ammunition, water, and rations for 3 days. The weapon was almost as tall as she was, weighing over 15 pounds with the scope and bipod. She moved through the darkness without complaint, her breathing steady, her mind already calculating distances and angles. By the time the sun rose, Elena was in position on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. She was 800 meters from where the main team would set up their observation post. Through her scope, she could see everything. The dirt road where the supply trucks would come, the abandoned buildings where threats might hide, the faces of her teammates as they moved into position below. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The valley remained quiet except for birds and the wind moving through the grass. Elena's body temperature dropped. Her muscles grew stiff. She ate snow for moisture and waited. This was the part of the job that most people couldn't handle. The endless nothing before the everything. The radio crackled to life in Elena's ear just after 10 in the morning. Major Petrov's voice was calm but alert. 3 vehicles were approaching from the north, moving slowly along the valley road. Elena adjusted her scope and found them immediately. 2 military trucks and 1 civilian vehicle, all moving in convoy formation. The lead truck had a mounted gun on top with a soldier scanning the ridgelines. Through the high-powered optics, Elena could see details that would be invisible to the naked eye. The driver of the lead truck had a cigarette between his lips. The gunner was young, maybe 18, with a nervous habit of touching the ammunition belt every few seconds. The second truck carried supplies under a canvas cover. The civilian car in the rear had 3 occupants, likely officers or officials. The convoy stopped 200 meters from where the reconnaissance team was hiding. This wasn't part of the expected pattern. According to intelligence, supply runs drove straight through without stopping. Something had changed. Elena watched as soldiers began climbing out of the trucks, weapons ready, spreading out in a search formation. They were looking for something. Major Petrov's voice came through the radio again, this time with an edge of concern. The team was compromised somehow. The enemy soldiers were moving directly toward their position. He ordered everyone to hold position and remain silent. If they moved now, they would definitely be spotted. Their only advantage was that the enemy didn't know exactly where they were yet. Elena counted 12 hostile soldiers on the ground. The gunner remained on the mounted weapon. The 3 occupants of the civilian car stayed inside. Through her scope, she watched the soldiers spread out in a wide line, moving slowly up the hill toward where her teammates were concealed. One soldier was carrying a detector of some kind, sweeping it back and forth. They were conducting a methodical search. Her finger rested gently on the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. Not yet. Her breathing had slowed to 6 breaths per minute. Her heart rate was steady at 52 beats per minute. She had trained her body to become a machine in these moments. Every muscle was relaxed except those needed to hold her position. She became part of the rock, part of the landscape. The enemy soldiers were now 100 meters from the reconnaissance team's position. Through the scope, Elena could see Dmitri, the sergeant who had mocked her during the briefing. He was pressed flat against the ground behind a fallen log, his weapon ready but useless at this range. If he fired, he would give away his position and the enemy's mounted gun would tear them apart in seconds. Major Petrov made a decision. His voice came through the radio with quiet authority. He was calling for extraction and ordering the team to fall back on his signal. They would move in pairs, using suppressing fire to cover each other's retreat. It was a dangerous plan, but staying in position meant certain capture or death. Then everything changed in an instant. One of the enemy soldiers, a tall man with a radio on his back, stopped walking. He was looking directly at the log where Dmitri was hiding. The soldier raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. He brought his weapon up slowly, aiming at the log. He had seen something, a reflection maybe, or a shape that didn't belong. Elena's training took over. There was no thought, no hesitation, only muscle memory and thousands of hours of practice. Her breathing stopped mid-exhale. Her finger moved from the guard to the trigger. The crosshairs settled on the soldier's chest, compensating for wind, distance, and the angle of the shot. The calculation happened in microseconds. 840 meters, wind from the east at 12 kilometers per hour. Target moving slowly. Adjust .3 mils left, .5 mils up. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The suppressor reduced the sound to a sharp crack that echoed off the valley walls. Through the scope, Elena saw the soldier with the radio stumble backward and fall. The other enemy soldiers froze for a crucial second, trying to locate where the shot had come from. They looked at the ridgeline, at the buildings, at each other. Elena was already working the bolt, chambering another round. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. The second target was the gunner on the mounted weapon. He was the most dangerous threat to her team. He was spinning the gun around, searching for her position. She fired again. The gunner collapsed over his weapon. Now the enemy soldiers understood they were under attack from a sniper. They began running in different directions, some seeking cover, others trying to flank the position they thought she was firing from. They were wrong about her location by almost 40 degrees. Their training told them to spread out and advance, but Elena's training had prepared her for exactly this scenario. The third shot took down a soldier who was shouting orders to the others. He appeared to be a squad leader. When he fell, the remaining soldiers lost their coordination. The fourth shot struck a soldier trying to reach the mounted gun. The fifth shot hit a man attempting to use the radio. Each shot was calculated, deliberate, and final. The entire sequence took less than 90 seconds. 5 enemy soldiers were down. The remaining 7 had found cover behind the vehicles and rocks. They were firing wildly in multiple directions, none of them coming close to Elena's actual position. The muzzle flash from her suppressed rifle was minimal, and she was using the sun's angle to her advantage, making her even harder to spot. Major Petrov's voice came through the radio, urgent but controlled. He was ordering the team to fall back now while the enemy was disorganized. Elena provided covering fire, keeping the enemy soldiers pinned behind their cover. She didn't aim to kill now, but to control their movement, to keep them afraid and uncertain. The reconnaissance team began their retreat, moving in pairs through the rough terrain. Dmitri and his partner went first, sprinting 20 meters before diving into cover. Elena watched through her scope, tracking any enemy soldier who might try to shoot at her retreating teammates. When one hostile fighter raised his head above the truck bed, Elena fired. The round struck the metal inches from his face, and he dropped back down. 2 more enemy soldiers attempted to reposition to get a better angle on the retreating team. Elena's 6th shot caught one in the leg, sending him sprawling. Her 7th shot forced the second soldier back into cover. She wasn't trying to kill everyone, just create enough chaos and fear that her team could escape safely. But then 3 more vehicles appeared on the road, coming fast from the south, reinforcements. The situation was deteriorating quickly.
If those vehicles reached the valley floor before her team cleared the area, they would be surrounded.
Elena made a split-second decision. Instead of targeting soldiers, she aimed at the lead truck's front tire. The 8th shot blew out the tire at 60 kilometers per hour. The truck swerved violently, crashed into a ditch, and rolled onto its side, blocking the narrow road completely. The vehicles behind it had to slam on their brakes. Soldiers began pouring out, but now they were caught in a traffic jam of their own making. Confused about what was happening, Elena's 9th shot struck the radiator of the second vehicle, sending steam and coolant spraying into the air. The driver and passengers scrambled out, thinking they were taking direct fire. The confusion was complete. Nobody knew where the shots were coming from. Nobody knew how many shooters there were. The enemy's advantage in numbers meant nothing when they couldn't find their target. Through her scope, Elena saw her team reach the tree line 400 meters away. They were safe for now, moving into terrain where vehicles couldn't follow. Major Petrov's voice came through the radio one more time, simple and direct. He told her to fall back. Her job was done, but Elena saw one more threat. An officer had climbed out of the civilian car, holding binoculars, scanning the ridgeline systematically. He was trained, experienced. His search pattern was methodical. In another 10 seconds, he would find her position. She could leave now and probably make it away safely, or she could eliminate this final threat. Elena made her choice in the span of a heartbeat. The officer with the binoculars was too dangerous to leave alive. He was systematically scanning the eastern ridgeline, his movements precise and professional. In seconds, he would locate her hide position. She adjusted her aim, compensating for the increased distance now that the vehicles had stopped further down the road. The 10th shot crossed 920 meters in under 2 seconds. The officer dropped the binoculars and collapsed backward against the civilian car. The remaining enemy soldiers finally spotted the muzzle flash from Elena's position. Bullets began striking the rocks around her, some coming dangerously close. She had maybe 10 seconds before they brought heavier weapons to bear. Elena rolled away from her firing position, grabbing her rifle and pack in one fluid motion. She scrambled backward over the rocky ridge, using the terrain to shield herself from incoming fire. Behind her, she heard the distinctive sound of a heavy machine gun opening up, tearing apart the position she had occupied just moments before. Rock fragments and dust filled the air where she had been lying. She moved fast but carefully, using every bit of cover the landscape provided. The enemy soldiers would be coming for her now, angry and eager for revenge. But she had a crucial advantage. She knew this terrain. She had studied the maps for days before the mission, memorized every gully and ridgeline, every possible escape route and rally point. The extraction point was 3 kilometers to the east, through rough country that would slow down any pursuit. Elena kept low, moving in short bursts between cover, constantly checking behind her for followers. Her radio was silent. The team would be maintaining radio silence until they reached safety. She was alone now, responsible for her own survival. After 30 minutes of hard movement, she paused in a dry creek bed to catch her breath and assess. She could hear vehicles in the distance, engines revving as they tried to navigate the rough terrain. They were searching for her, spreading out in a wide net. She checked her ammunition. 3 rounds left in the rifle. Her sidearm had a full magazine. Not much for a running firefight, but enough if she was smart. Elena continued moving, following the creek bed east until it curved north toward a dense pine forest. The trees would provide cover from aerial observation if the enemy called in helicopters. As she entered the forest, she heard voices behind her speaking in harsh tones. A search party, maybe 5 or 6 men, was following her tracks. She found a position overlooking her own trail, nestled between 2 large boulders with a clear field of view back the way she had come. Her body was screaming for water and rest, but she forced those needs aside. The search party would pass below her in minutes. She had to decide, keep running or make a stand. The tactical part of her mind ran the calculations. If she kept running, they would eventually catch her. She was fast, but they were fresh and had numbers. If she engaged them here, she might eliminate the immediate pursuit, but the gunfire would draw others to her location. Neither option was good, but staying ahead meant staying alive. Elena chose to run. She slipped away from the overlook position and pushed deeper into the forest, moving as quietly as possible through the undergrowth. Behind her, she heard the search party reach the spot where she had paused. They were arguing about which direction she had gone. One voice, older and authoritative, ordered them to split up. That was a mistake on their part and an opportunity for her. As the sun began to set, Elena reached the extraction point, a small clearing marked by a distinctive rock formation that looked like a broken tooth. She keyed her radio once, a short burst to signal her arrival. Within seconds, Major Petrov responded. The team was 200 meters south of her position, holding security while they waited. She should approach from the north and give the recognition signal. Elena circled around, moving slowly now, exhausted but alert. She gave a low whistle, the first 4 notes of an old folk song. Dmitri whistled back the next 4 notes. She moved into their perimeter and nearly collapsed. Someone handed her a water bottle. She drank half of it in 3 long gulps. Major Petrov was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect maybe mixed with something else. He asked if she was injured. She shook her head. He asked how many targets she had engaged. She told him 10 confirmed, plus 2 vehicles disabled. He nodded slowly and told her they needed to move immediately. The enemy would find this location eventually. The team moved through the night, navigating by moonlight and memory. They traveled 8 kilometers before calling for helicopter extraction from a secure landing zone. As they waited in the darkness, listening for the sound of rotors, Dmitri approached Elena. He stood there for a moment, looking uncomfortable, then extended his hand. He told her he was wrong about her. He said what she did today saved all their lives, and he would never doubt her again. Elena shook his hand without comment. She didn't need his approval or his apology. She had done her job, nothing more and nothing less. But she saw how the other men were looking at her now, with a new awareness, a new understanding. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, descending rapidly into the landing zone with its lights off. They loaded quickly and lifted off into the night sky. Through the open door, Elena watched the landscape fall away beneath them. Somewhere down there, enemy soldiers were still searching for the sniper who had devastated their patrol. They would be searching for a long time. Back at base, the mission was classified as a success. The reconnaissance team had gathered valuable intelligence before the compromise, and they had all made it out alive despite heavy enemy presence. Elena's role was mentioned in the after-action report but not emphasized. The official story was simply that the team had broken contact successfully, but word spread anyway, the way it always does in military units. By the next morning, everyone on the base knew that the new female sniper had engaged 12 targets in under 5 minutes and covered the team's extraction against overwhelming odds. The story grew with each telling, as stories do, but the core facts remained unchanged. 3 days later, Elena was called to a meeting with the base commander, a colonel she had never met. She expected a debriefing or perhaps a formal commendation. Instead, the colonel handed her a sealed envelope marked with high-level security classifications. Inside was a new assignment: orders to report to a special operations unit that conducted deep reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. The colonel told her that her actions in the valley had attracted attention at the highest levels of command. They needed people with her particular skills for operations that required precision and nerve. She would undergo additional training in survival, evasion, and advanced reconnaissance techniques. If she accepted, she would be operating independently or in very small teams, often without support or backup. Elena looked at the orders, then at the colonel. She asked if she could refuse. He told her honestly that yes, she could refuse without penalty. This was volunteer work, the most dangerous kind.
Many who accepted these assignments didn't come back.
He wanted her to understand that clearly before she decided. She thought about her village, her mother's tears when she left for the military, her father's compass that she still carried in her pocket. She thought about the soldiers who had mocked her, the instructors who had doubted her, the endless cold mornings in the forest learning to hunt. She thought about the feeling of looking through the scope when the world became simple and clear. Elena told the colonel she accepted. He nodded as if he had expected nothing else. He told her to report to the training facility in 48 hours and to tell no one where she was going or what she would be doing. Her official record would show a transfer to an administrative position. In reality, she would cease to exist on any normal military roster. That night, Elena packed her few belongings. She cleaned her rifle one last time, running the cloth through the barrel with practiced care. The weapon had saved her life and the lives of her teammates. She whispered a quiet thank you to it, knowing that where she was going, she would be issued new equipment, new identities, new missions. Dmitri found her before she left. He gave her a small icon of St. Barbara, the patron saint of artillerymen and those who work with weapons. He told her to keep it close and come back alive. She tucked it into her pack beside her father's compass. These small things, these connections to who she was, would matter in the darkness ahead. The training facility was located in a region so remote that it appeared on no civilian maps. Elena arrived after 3 transfers, the last on a military truck with blackened windows. When the doors opened, she found herself in a compound surrounded by dense forest, with buildings that looked abandoned from the outside but hummed with activity within. She was one of 12 candidates, pulled from various elite units across the military. 2 were other women, both older than Elena, both carrying themselves with the quiet confidence of people who had nothing left to prove. The men ranged from hardened veterans to young soldiers who had distinguished themselves in recent operations. All of them shared one quality: they had been tested under fire and had not broken. The lead instructor introduced himself simply as Volkov, no first name, no rank insignia. He was in his 50s, built like a wolf, with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. He told them that half would wash out in the first 2 weeks. Of those who remained, perhaps 2 or 3 would complete the full program. The rest would return to their units with their memories of this place classified forever. The training was unlike anything Elena had experienced. Standard sniper school had focused on marksmanship, fieldcraft, and patience. This program assumed those skills were already mastered. Instead, they learned how to survive alone in hostile territory for weeks at a time, how to navigate without GPS or maps, how to blend into civilian populations. how to extract intelligence from unwilling sources. They learned to speak 3 languages fluently enough to pass as natives. They studied the cultural customs of potential operational areas. They memorized the organizational structures of enemy forces, the faces of high-value targets, the locations of safe houses and dead drops. The amount of information they had to absorb was overwhelming, delivered at a pace that allowed no weakness. Physical training happened before dawn and after midnight. They ran through the forest in complete darkness, climbed obstacles while carrying full combat loads, swam in ice-cold lakes until their lips turned blue. Those who complained were reminded that the enemy wouldn't care about their comfort. Those who quit were escorted out the same day, their belongings already packed. Elena excelled at the physical challenges but struggled with the language training. Her accent in the foreign tongues was too obvious, marking her as an outsider. The linguistics instructor, a severe woman named Katya, worked with her for extra hours each evening, forcing her to repeat phrases until the pronunciation was flawless. Katya told her that a single mispronounced word could mean the difference between life and death in the field. The psychological training was the hardest part. They were subjected to stress positions, sleep deprivation, and realistic captivity scenarios designed to break their will. Elena spent 3 days in a small, dark cell, cold and hungry, while interrogators questioned her repeatedly. They used every technique short of actual torture, trying to get her to reveal classified information or simply to make her break character. She held on by retreating into the same mental space she used while shooting. She became still inside, a frozen lake that reflected questions back without revealing its depths. The interrogators eventually gave up, frustrated by her silence. When they released her, Volkov was waiting. He told her she had done well, but in the real world, the enemy wouldn't stop after 3 days. By the end of the second month, 5 candidates had washed out. 3 quit voluntarily, 2 were dismissed for security violations, minor mistakes that would have been catastrophic in operational conditions. The remaining 7 were pushed even harder, formed into a temporary unit, and sent on field exercises that simulated actual missions. Their first exercise was to infiltrate a nearby town, make contact with a local asset, retrieve a package, and exfiltrate without being detected. The town was populated by military personnel and their families, all of whom had been instructed to watch for suspicious activity. If the candidates were caught, they would fail immediately. Elena was assigned a cover identity as a university student researching local history. She carried forged documents, a worn backpack with appropriate props, and a camera to support her story. She entered the town on a bus with actual civilians, her heart pounding but her face calm. She looked out the window like any bored student on a field trip. The contact was supposed to meet her in a library at noon. Elena arrived early, browsing books and observing the space. She noted 3 people who might be watching her: a man reading a newspaper who never turned the page, a woman at a computer who kept glancing toward the door, and a librarian who seemed too attentive. They were probably instructors or role players testing her awareness. The contact arrived exactly on time, an older man who sat at a nearby table with a stack of history books. He coughed twice, the recognition signal. Elena approached and asked if he knew where to find books about the town's founding. He pointed to a shelf in the back corner. She thanked him and walked to that section, where she found a slim volume with an envelope tucked inside. The package. She photographed several pages from various books, maintaining her cover as a researcher, then checked out 2 books using her false identification. The librarian examined her ID closely but found nothing wrong. Elena left the library and walked to a cafe, where she ordered tea and sat by the window, apparently reading but actually watching for surveillance. After an hour, confident she hadn't been followed, she walked to the bus station. Her ticket was for the evening bus, still 3 hours away. She spent the time exploring the town like a curious student, stopping at a small museum, taking photographs of old buildings, chatting briefly with locals about the town's history. She was building a legend, creating a believable pattern of behavior. When she finally boarded the evening bus, she felt the tension release slightly. She had done it. But as the bus pulled away from the station, she noticed a car following at a careful distance. The driver was alone, wearing civilian clothes, but something about his posture screamed military. She had been compromised somehow. Elena made a decision. At the next stop, she got off the bus, claiming she felt sick. The car drove past but turned around at the next intersection. She walked quickly into a residential neighborhood, turned several corners, and ducked into a narrow alley. She climbed a fence into someone's backyard, moved through to the next street, and entered a small grocery store through the back entrance. She bought a scarf and sunglasses, changed her appearance in the store's bathroom, and walked out the front looking like a different person. The car was nowhere in sight. She made her way to the alternate extraction point, a farm road 5 kilometers outside of town. A truck was waiting there, engine running. She climbed into the back and knocked twice on the cab. The truck pulled away immediately. Back at the facility, Volkov was waiting with the other candidates who had completed the exercise. 3 had been caught during their infiltration attempts. 1 had successfully retrieved the package but been followed back. Only Elena and 1 other candidate, a veteran named Pavel, had completed the mission without compromise. Volkov told Elena that she had made good decisions under pressure, adapting when her plan failed. But he also pointed out that she had been spotted leaving the library, probably by the newspaper reader. Her technique was good, but she needed to be invisible, not just unnoticed. There was a difference, and she needed to learn it. The training continued for 4 more months. They ran dozens of exercises, each more complex than the last. They learned to conduct surveillance in crowded cities, to photograph documents quickly without detection, to use coded communication systems, to recognize when an operation was compromised and abort without hesitation. They learned about explosives and sabotage, not as demolition experts but as operators who might need to destroy equipment or create diversions. They practiced emergency medical procedures, treating their own wounds under field conditions. They memorized escape and evasion routes in a dozen different countries, studied satellite imagery until they could navigate by memory alone. Elena formed no close friendships during this time. The other candidates were professional, helpful even, but everyone understood that they might never see each other again after graduation. They might be assigned to opposite ends of the world, conducting operations that would remain classified for decades. Some of them might die in those operations, and the others would never know. The final exercise was the most challenging. Each candidate was inserted alone into a foreign country, given a cover identity and a mission objective, and told to complete it within 2 weeks. Elena found herself in a city she had never visited, with documents identifying her as a photographer for an international news agency. Her mission was to locate and photograph a specific military facility without being detected by the country's extensive security apparatus. She spent the first 3 days establishing her cover, taking legitimate photographs of tourist attractions and cultural sites. She filed several stories with an actual news website that served as a front for intelligence operations. She interviewed locals, ate at restaurants, behaved exactly like the journalist she was pretending to be. On the 4th day, she began her reconnaissance of the target facility, photographing it from different angles using telephoto lenses, noting the security patterns and vehicle movements. On the 7th day, she bribed a taxi driver to take her on a specific route that passed by a rear entrance. She captured crucial images through the taxi window while apparently reading her phone. On the 10th day of her mission, Elena noticed a pattern that made her blood run cold. The same 2 men had been near her at 3 different locations over 2 days. They were good, changing their appearances slightly, never looking directly at her, but she had been trained to notice such things. The local security service had identified her as a person of interest. She had 2 choices: abort the mission and extract immediately using emergency protocols, or complete her objective and take the risk. The mission parameters had been clear. This was a test of judgment as much as skill. A real operative would need to know when to push forward and when to pull back. Elena studied the men through her camera lens, pretending to photograph a street market. They were professionals but not experts. She could work around them. She spent the next day deliberately leading them on a boring tour of her previous locations, reinforcing her cover as a photographer, gathering material for articles. She visited the same cafe twice, the same museum, the same park where she had been before. She wanted them to see a predictable pattern. Someone focused on cultural subjects, nothing suspicious. That evening she noticed they had pulled back their surveillance. They were still watching, but from a greater distance, apparently convinced she was harmless. This was her opportunity. She changed hotels using a reservation she had made under a different name days earlier. She altered her appearance with a wig and different clothing style she had kept hidden in her luggage. When she left the new hotel before dawn, she was certain she had lost the surveillance. She reached the target facility just as the morning shift was arriving. Workers streamed through the gates showing identification badges, moving with the routine boredom of people doing the same thing every day. Elena had positioned herself in a cafe across the street, a place with large windows that gave her a perfect view. She ordered breakfast and set up her laptop, looking like any young professional starting their workday. For 3 hours, she photographed every vehicle entering and exiting, every person in uniform, every detail of the security procedures. Her camera was equipped with a lens designed to look like a standard zoom, but capable of capturing much greater detail. To anyone watching, she appeared to be working on her laptop, while occasionally taking photos of the street scene for her supposed articles. She downloaded the images to an encrypted server using a secure connection, then wiped the camera's memory card and replaced it with one containing only innocent tourist photos. If she was arrested now, they would find nothing incriminating. The valuable intelligence was already on its way back to her handlers, transmitted through relay servers that would make it impossible to trace. Elena paid for her breakfast, gathered her things, and walked calmly toward the bus station. She had 48 hours before her scheduled extraction. In that time, she needed to maintain her cover, while avoiding the security services who would likely be searching for whoever had photographed the facility. She spent those 2 days moving between different parts of the city, taking photographs of markets and street life, interviewing artists and shop owners for her fictitious articles. She stayed in crowded places where surveillance was difficult. She varied her routes and timings. She became one person among millions, unremarkable and forgettable. On the morning of her extraction, she took a taxi to the airport, checked in for an international flight using her journalist credentials, and passed through security without incident. Only when the plane lifted off the runway did she allow herself to relax. She had completed the mission. She had proven she could operate alone in hostile territory, make critical decisions under pressure, and accomplish her objectives without support. When she landed back at the training facility, Volkov was waiting with a thin smile. He told her that 4 candidates had completed their final exercises successfully. 2 had been caught by local security and extracted through emergency channels. 1 had aborted the mission early, correctly judging that the risk had become too high. That candidate had passed as well, because knowing when to quit was as important as knowing when to push forward. The graduation ceremony was private and brief. There were no families present, no photographs taken, no public recognition. Volkov handed each of them a folder containing their first operational assignment. He told them that from this moment forward, they would be operating in the shadows. Their victories would never be celebrated. Their sacrifices would never be acknowledged. They would serve in silence and, if necessary, die in silence. Elena opened her folder. She was being assigned to a conflict zone where insurgent groups were receiving sophisticated weapons from unknown sources. Her mission was to infiltrate the region, identify the supply networks, and provide targeting information for strikes against key nodes. The assignment was expected to last 6 months, possibly longer. She would be operating alone, with check-ins every 2 weeks through encrypted communications. She had 3 days to prepare before deployment. She spent that time studying maps and intelligence reports, memorizing the faces of known insurgent leaders, learning the local dialect well enough to pass as a regional native. She packed her equipment carefully, weapons that could be explained as hunting tools, communication devices hidden inside ordinary objects, cash in multiple currencies, forged documents that would stand up to moderate scrutiny. On the day of deployment, she said goodbye to no one because there was no one to say goodbye to. Her family believed she was working in an administrative position far from any danger. Her former unit had forgotten about her, assuming she had transferred to some desk job. She had become a ghost, existing in official records but absent from the real world. The insertion was made through a neutral country. She crossed the border hidden among refugees fleeing the conflict, carrying only what she could fit in a single backpack. She looked like any other displaced person, exhausted and frightened, trying to reach safety. The border guards barely glanced at her papers before waving her through. For the first month, Elena established herself in a small town near the conflict zone. She rented a room in a boarding house run by an elderly woman who asked no questions. She took a job at a market stall selling vegetables and talking with customers. She attended the local mosque, prayed with the community, gradually became a familiar face. Nobody suspected that the quiet young woman counting out potatoes was mapping insurgent movements and identifying weapons caches. She documented everything through a combination of memory and hidden notes. She observed which vehicles came and went at suspicious times. She listened to conversations in the market, picking up references to deliveries and meetings. She befriended a truck driver who, after several weeks of casual conversation, mentioned hauling unusual cargo to locations in the mountains. The intelligence she provided was precise and actionable. She would transmit coordinates, descriptions, timings, and patterns through her encrypted communications. Days or weeks later, she would hear about airstrikes or raids that disrupted the insurgent operations. She never knew if her information had been used, and she never asked. Her job was to observe and report, not to question the outcomes. In the 4th month, her cover was nearly compromised. An insurgent commander arrived in town, a man known for his paranoia and brutal methods of rooting out spies. He began asking questions about recent arrivals, focusing particularly on anyone who had come from outside the region. Elena heard about his inquiries through the market gossip network. She knew she should pull back, maybe even extract entirely, but she was close to identifying the main supply route. If she left now, months of work would be wasted. She made the decision to stay but changed her pattern. She stopped going to the market every day, claiming illness. She paid her rent in advance and told her landlady she would be visiting relatives in a nearby village. Instead, she moved into the hills overlooking the main roads, living rough like a shepherd, watching the traffic patterns from a distance. She stayed there for 2 weeks, documenting every vehicle movement, comparing what she saw against the intelligence reports she had memorized. Finally, she identified the pattern. Certain trucks from a specific company were making irregular runs along a route that made no commercial sense. She followed one of these trucks on foot, tracking it through the mountain passes to a warehouse compound, 20 kilometers from the nearest town. Through binoculars, she observed crates being unloaded, their size and markings consistent with weapons shipments. She photographed everything from her hiding position, then made her way back to town after dark. The transmission she sent that night contained enough information to dismantle a significant portion of the supply network. 3 days later, she heard explosions in the distance as the warehouse compound was destroyed in what the news called an accidental explosion. 2 weeks after that, the insurgent commander left town, recalled by his superiors to explain the loss of the weapons. Elena had survived, accomplished her mission, and maintained her cover. But she also understood how close she had come to discovery. The line between. The extended mission brought new challenges that tested Elena in ways the training had not fully prepared her for. Living under a false identity for months at a time meant constantly maintaining her cover story, never relaxing, never making a mistake that might reveal who she really was. The psychological weight of this deception grew heavier with each passing week. She began experiencing dreams where she forgot her real name, where Elena Volkov disappeared entirely, and only her cover identity remained. She would wake in the middle of the night, momentarily confused about where she was or why she was there. These moments of disorientation frightened her more than any physical danger she had faced. Her contact handler, whom she knew only through encrypted messages, sensed something in her reports. The communications became more frequent, asking not just about intelligence matters but about her well-being. She was instructed to take a day each week for herself, to break routine, to remember who she was beneath the disguise. It was good operational advice, but it was also an acknowledgement of a truth. This work consumed people from the inside out. In her 8th month, Elena identified a new player in the weapons supply network, a businessman who operated legitimate companies as fronts for arms trafficking. He was wealthy, connected, and protected by both corrupt officials and insurgent groups who depended on his supplies. Getting close to him would be dangerous, but the intelligence value was enormous. Elena engineered an introduction through the market where she worked. The businessman's wife liked to shop there personally, believing that haggling with vendors was a way to stay connected to ordinary life despite her wealth. Elena made sure to provide excellent service, offering the best produce at fair prices, engaging in pleasant conversation without being too forward. After several encounters, The wife invited Elena to work as a server at a dinner party they were hosting. It was a small opportunity, but it gave Elena access to the businessman's home, where she could observe the guests, overhear conversations, and potentially gather intelligence about his operations. She accepted the offer with appropriate gratitude and humility. The dinner party revealed more than she had hoped. The guests included local officials, business partners, and two men whose faces she recognized from intelligence briefings as mid-level insurgent leaders. They spoke carefully, aware that servants were present, but alcohol loosened their tongues as the evening progressed. Elena served food and drinks while listening to fragments of conversation about delivery schedules and payment arrangements. In the kitchen, preparing the next course, she photographed several documents that had been carelessly left on a counter, contracts and shipping manifests that would help intelligence analysts map the entire supply network. She used a camera disguised as a button on her server's uniform, a piece of equipment so small and sophisticated that even a physical search might miss it. The businessman noticed her efficiency and offered her regular work at future events. She accepted, knowing that this access was exactly what the mission required. Over the next month, she worked 3 more parties, each time gathering additional pieces of the puzzle. She learned names, saw faces, overheard plans. The intelligence she transmitted was building a comprehensive picture of the weapons trafficking operation. But success brought scrutiny. The businessman's security chief, a former military officer with sharp instincts, began watching Elena with suspicion. He asked her questions about her background, her family, her reasons for being in the region. She answered with the story she had prepared, the legend that had been carefully constructed to withstand investigation. He seemed satisfied, but she noticed he continued to observe her whenever they were in the same room. Elena reported the security chief's interest to her handlers. They advised caution, but told her to maintain her position unless she felt the risk had become unacceptable. The decision was hers to make in the field. She weighed the danger against the value of the intelligence access and chose to continue, but she prepared contingency plans for rapid extraction if necessary. The situation came to a head at a large gathering, celebrating a successful business deal. Elena was serving drinks when she noticed the security chief speaking quietly with 2 men, who were clearly not local. They had the bearing of intelligence officers, the kind of people who specialized in counterintelligence operations. They were looking at her while they talked. She finished serving her current tray, walked calmly to the kitchen, and made her decision. The mission was compromised. She had perhaps an hour before they moved against her, maybe less. She removed her server's uniform, changed into clothes she had hidden in her bag, and left through the servant's entrance. She walked quickly but without panic toward the safe house location she had scouted months ago. Behind her, she heard shouts and the sound of vehicles starting. They had discovered her absence faster than she expected. She abandoned the walking pace and began to run, ducking through narrow streets and alleys she had memorized for exactly this situation. She reached a small mosque and slipped inside, moving through the women's prayer section to a back exit that led to a residential area. A taxi was waiting at the corner, part of an emergency extraction network maintained by her organization. The driver asked no questions, simply drove toward the border using back roads that avoided checkpoints. Elena knew that every minute counted now. The alarm would spread quickly, and the border guards would be alerted to watch for a woman matching her description. They switched vehicles twice, each time moving to something older and less noticeable. The final vehicle was a produce truck making a legitimate delivery across the border. Elena hid among crates of vegetables covered by a tarp, breathing slowly to manage her anxiety. At the border, she heard voices as guards inspected the truck. They spoke to the driver, asked routine questions, walked around the vehicle, then silence. The engine started again. They were moving. She had made it across. When the truck finally stopped and the driver pulled back the tarp, Elena found herself in a warehouse on the safe side of the border. Her handler was waiting, a man she had never met in person, known to her only through coded messages and a voice on encrypted calls. He told her that her work had been exceptional, that the intelligence she provided had led to major disruptions of the weapons network. But he also told her that she was burned in that region now, that her cover identity was compromised, and that she could never return. The businessman and his security chief were actively searching for her, and the insurgent groups had put a price on her head. Elena asked about the others she had left behind, the elderly landlady, the people she had worked with at the market. Her handler assured her that they would be protected, that care had been taken to ensure they appeared innocent of any knowledge of her real activities. They were safe, but she could never contact them again. Those relationships, like her cover identity, were dead. She was given 2 weeks of debriefing, during which intelligence analysts extracted every detail she could remember about what she had seen and heard. They were particularly interested in the documents she had photographed and the conversations she had overheard. Her information, combined with other intelligence sources, was painting a clear picture of how weapons were flowing into the conflict zone. After the debriefing, she was offered 3 options: another assignment in a different region, a position training new operatives at the facility where she had learned her craft, or an administrative role that would keep her away from field operations. She had earned the right to choose her next path. Her handler told her honestly that she had already done more than most operatives accomplish in entire careers. Elena spent a week considering her options. She thought about the valley where she had first proven herself as a sniper, about the clear simplicity of looking through a scope and making a shot. She thought about the months living under a false identity, the constant stress of maintaining her cover, the dreams where she forgot who she really was. She thought about the work that still needed to be done and the people who depended on others to do it. She told her handler she wanted to return to the field, but not to covert operations. She wanted to go back to direct action work, to missions where the objectives were clear and the execution was tactical rather than strategic. She was a sniper, she said, and that was where she belonged. Give her a target and a mission, and she would accomplish it. But she was done living as someone else, her handler understood. Within a month, Elena found herself assigned to a special operations unit, conducting precision strikes against high-value targets. She would work with small teams, providing overwatch and long-range fire support for raids and rescues. The missions were dangerous, but the danger was immediate and tactical, not the slow psychological erosion of deep cover work. The first mission with her new unit was a rescue operation. A relief worker had been kidnapped by militants and was being held in a remote compound. The assault team would breach the compound and extract the hostage. Elena's job was to eliminate any external threats and provide cover for the extraction. It felt familiar, like returning to work she understood in her bones. She set up position on a ridge overlooking the compound, 800 meters away, and settled in to wait for the mission to begin. Through her scope, she watched the guards making their rounds, counted their weapons, noted their patterns. When the assault team called ready, she confirmed her position and prepared to engage. The world narrowed to breathing and trigger control, wind and distance, the simple mathematics of the shot. The rescue mission unfolded exactly as planned. Elena took out 3 guards in quick succession as the assault team breached the compound walls. Her shots were precise and timed perfectly with the team's movements, preventing the guards from raising an alarm or mounting an effective defense. The hostage was extracted safely within 6 minutes of the operation beginning. Nobody on the assault team was injured. After the mission, the team commander thanked her personally. He was a veteran of dozens of operations, and he told her that her shooting was the best he had seen in 20 years of service. She had given them a clean mission, the kind where everyone goes home. Elena accepted the compliment with a simple nod. This was the work she was meant to do, and she was good at it. Over the next year, she participated in 17 missions with the Special Operations Unit. Each one reinforced her reputation as someone who could be trusted in the most critical moments. The other operators began requesting her specifically for their missions. They knew that with Elena providing overwatch, they could focus entirely on their objectives without worrying about external threats. But the missions took their toll in ways that were harder to see. Each shot she took was a life ended, a person who would never go home to their family. She understood that most of the targets were dangerous people doing terrible things, but the weight of it accumulated nonetheless. She began having difficulty sleeping, seeing faces in the darkness when she closed her eyes. The unit psychologist noticed the signs during routine evaluations. Elena was referred to a specialist who worked specifically with combat veterans dealing with the psychological aftermath of their service. The therapist told her that what she was experiencing was normal, that taking life, even when justified and necessary, left marks on the human psyche that needed to be acknowledged and processed. Elena attended the therapy sessions because they were mandatory, but she struggled to open up about her feelings. She had spent so long controlling her emotions, becoming still and calm in the most stressful situations, that accessing those deeper feelings felt dangerous. What if she lost the ability to do her job? What if the stillness that made her an effective sniper disappeared once she started examining it? The therapist was patient. She didn't push Elena to reveal more than she was ready to share. Instead, she taught her techniques for managing stress and processing trauma without losing her operational effectiveness. They talked about compartmentalization, about creating mental space between the person who pulled the trigger and the person who lived the rest of her life. It wasn't about forgetting or denying what she had done, but about integrating those experiences in a way that allowed her to continue functioning. During this period, Elena received news that her father had died. He had been ill for some time, but because of the classified nature of her work, she had not been able to visit him. She requested leave to attend the funeral and was granted 5 days. When she returned to her village for the first time in 3 years, she barely recognized it. Everything seemed smaller, older, more fragile than she remembered. Her mother greeted her with tears and questions. Where had Elena been? Why had she not come home? The official story was that Elena had been working in administrative positions that required extensive travel. Her mother accepted this explanation, or at least pretended to, because what other choice did she have? At the funeral, Elena stood beside her father's grave and felt a distance from the moment that she couldn't bridge. Everyone around her was crying, sharing memories, grieving openly. She felt numb, unable to access the emotions she knew should be there. The therapist had warned her about this, about how trauma and stress could create emotional disconnection. She had become so good at controlling her feelings that she had difficulty feeling anything at all. After the funeral, her mother pulled her aside and gave her something wrapped in cloth. It was her father's old hunting rifle, the one Elena had learned to shoot with as a child. Her mother said that her father had wanted Elena to have it, that he had been proud of her even though he couldn't always understand the life she had chosen. Elena held the rifle and finally felt something break inside her. She cried for the first time in years. She returned to duty with a new understanding of herself and her work. The therapy sessions became more productive as she learned to acknowledge the emotional cost of what she did while still maintaining her effectiveness as an operator. She began to see her role not just as a shooter, but as someone who made difficult choices so others wouldn't have to. It didn't erase the weight, but it gave it meaning. Her reputation continued to grow. She was awarded several commendations that remained classified, recognizing actions that could never be publicly acknowledged. Other nations' special operations units requested her participation in joint missions. She became known in certain circles as one of the most reliable and skilled snipers in active service. But Elena understood that this life had an expiration date. Every mission carried risk, and the odds accumulated over time. She had been lucky, so far, surviving situations that could easily have gone differently. She began thinking about what came after, about how someone transitioned from this work to a normal life if such a thing was even possible. The question was answered for her during a mission in the mountains. Her team was extracting a high-value target when they were ambushed by a larger enemy force. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Elena's position was compromised and she had to displace under fire. A round struck the rock beside her head, sending fragments into her face and neck. Another hit her left shoulder, breaking bone. She managed to continue providing covering fire as the team extracted, but the injuries were serious. She was evacuated to a military hospital, where surgeons spent hours removing fragments and repairing damage. The doctors told her she would recover fully, but her shoulder would never be quite the same. The fine motor control required for precision shooting at extreme distances would be compromised. Her operational career was over. At 27 years old, Elena Volkov was retired from active duty. She received a medical discharge, a pension, and a folder full of classified documents detailing her service record that she could never show anyone. The unit held a private ceremony where they presented her with a custom rifle engraved with coordinates, the locations of her most significant missions, known only to those who had been there. The transition to civilian life was harder than any mission she had undertaken. She moved to a small city far from her village, trying to start over in a place where nobody knew her background. She enrolled in university to finish the degree she had abandoned when she joined the military. She tried to have normal relationships, but found it difficult to connect with people who couldn't understand the experiences that had shaped her. At night, she still dreamed of looking through rifle scopes, of making calculations and taking shots. Sometimes these were memories of actual missions. Sometimes they were nightmares where the targets had different faces, where the missions went wrong in terrible ways. The therapy helped, but it couldn't erase years of training and experience that had rewired her brain to see the world as a series of angles and threats. Eventually, she found work as a consultant for law enforcement, training police snipers in technique and tactics. It allowed her to use her skills without the moral weight of actual combat. She was good at teaching, patient and precise in her explanations. Her students respected her expertise, though none of them knew the full extent of her experience. Years passed. The physical wounds healed, leaving scars that she rarely thought about. The psychological wounds took longer, but they also healed in their way. She learned to live with the memories, to acknowledge them without being controlled by them. She built a quiet life, nothing like the intensity of her operational years, but satisfying in its own way. On certain anniversaries, she would receive encrypted messages from former teammates, brief acknowledgments of shared experiences that could never be fully explained. She treasured these connections to people who understood what she had been through, even as she recognized the importance of moving forward. One morning, Elena woke up and realized that she had not dreamed of missions or targets for the first time in years. She had dreamed, instead of the mountains near her childhood village, of walking through the forest with her father, of the simple joy of being young and alive before the world had become complicated. It felt like a release, like permission to let go of some weight she had been carrying. She kept her father's old rifle in a locked case along with the custom rifle from her unit. She rarely looked at them, but knowing they were there connected her to who she had been, to the choices she had made, to the person she had forged herself into through will and determination. She was no longer that person, but she carried that past inside her, integrated now into someone more complete. Elena Volkov had been many things: a village girl who learned to hunt, a soldier who proved herself in combat, a sniper who took out 12 targets in 5 minutes to save her team, a covert operative who gathered intelligence behind enemy lines, a special operations shooter who provided overwatch for critical missions. She had lived multiple lives, worn multiple identities, made choices that few people would ever have to make. Now she was simply Elena, a woman with scars and memories, teaching others and building a quiet life far from the shadows where she had once operated. She had been underestimated once, judged by her appearance and gender rather than her capabilities. She had proven those judgments wrong in the most definitive way possible, and then she had moved beyond proving anything to anyone, finding a kind of peace that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of, without needing anyone else to acknowledge it.